How do you explain to someone the feeling you get when you know you're a witness to history, and not a singular moment or a glitch in the matrix, not happenstance or coincidence, but genuinely finding yourself at the beginning of a story, a coming-of-age story, a story of tradition, a story of adventure, and a story that'll be told decades from now when you were here, watching it for yourself. And by now, I'm sure everyone has seen what's happened this last month. Erling Haaland has owned October, scoring a hat-trick against Manchester United, once against Southampton, and a brace against Brighton, sitting clear as the Premier League's top scorer this season. But how did we get here? Erling Braut Haaland was born July 21st in the year 2000 in the city of Leeds, where his father Alfie Haaland played football for at the time. Father Haaland moved to Man City that summer, where he found himself on the receiving end of the sport's most infamous tackle. Alfie retired shortly after, and the family moved back to Norway, and this is where Erling's football journey began. He would spend 11 years at hometown club Bryne, developing in the same academy that nurtured his father. He made his professional debut at age 15, scoring 18 goals in 14 games in his first season for the B team. By 2017, Haaland made his first transfer to Norwegian powerhouse Molde, where he was coached by a name you guys might recognize, club hero Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. The teenager would average 0.4 goals a game in 2 seasons with the senior team, scoring 20 times in 50 league appearances. This was enough to pique interest from Austrian football project Redbull Salzburg. They signed Haaland in January of 2019, making his debut a month later at the age of 18. Then came Haaland's first viral moment of his career. May 30th, 2019, Norway versus Honduras in the Under-20 World Cup. Norway humiliated the Central Americans, winning 12-0. But the headline wasn't about the results, it was about the top scorer. Haaland scored 9 times that day. 9, setting the record for most goals scored by a single player in a match in the competition's history. Haaland had announced himself to the world that summer, but the announcement felt more like a whisper at the time. Jump to July, just a month later, and he scored his first hat-trick for Salzburg in the Austrian Cup. This was followed by another hat-trick 3 weeks later in the Austrian Bundesliga. Fast forward to September now, and Haaland would score a hat-trick in the league again, making it his 6th game in a row with a goal. 3 days later, and Haaland would make his debut in Europe's most prestigious competition, the UEFA Champions League, and he didn't disappoint. It only took Haaland 1 half to score 3 goals against Belgian side Henk, giving the 18-year-old 4 hat-tricks in just 4 months. And the goals kept coming. Erling scored against Klopp's Liverpool side in his next Champions League game, followed by a brace against Ancelotti's Napoli. And this is where the buzz really started to pick up. He scored again in the rematch against Napoli, making him the only teenager to ever score in his first 4 consecutive Champions League appearances. Haaland would continue his rampage until the end of the calendar year, scoring in the Champions League again against Henk in November. This made Haaland one of the 5 other players to score in the first 5 games of the Champions League group stage. Those other players include Alessandro Del Piero, Neymar, Robert Lewandowski, and Cristiano Ronaldo. Haaland's final Champions League game with Salzburg would end in defeat to Liverpool, but at this point, the world had seen enough. Haaland's record for Salzburg in 11 months was absolutely ridiculous. The young boy had scored 29 goals in only 27 appearances, 28 of those coming in his last 22 games. Haaland was ready to move at the turn of the new year, and despite offers to reunite with his old manager at Manchester United and the chance to play with Cristiano at Juventus, Erling chose to come to the most prolific exporter of young talent in world football, Borussia Dortmund. In just the last 10 years, Dortmund have been responsible for progressing the careers of some of the decade's most defining players. Think back to a younger Robert Lewandowski, Mario Götze, Mats Hummels, Ilkay Gundogan, and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. No club in Europe is better at taking raw talent and pushing it to the next level, and Haaland would be no different. He made his Bundesliga debut against Augsburg on January 18, 2020, and you guessed it, he scored a hat-trick, bringing Dortmund back from a 3-1 deficit to eventually win the game 5-3. And he did it all coming off the bench in a span of just 23 minutes. 6 days later, Haaland would make his second appearance against Cologne, coming off the bench and scoring twice. Despite making his first appearance on January 18th and playing less than an hour of professional football, Erling won the Bundesliga Player of the Month, and his February would be even more impressive. He scored another brace on February 1st against Union Berlin, making him the only player in Bundesliga history to score 7 goals in their first 3 games. See, Austrian football fans got a taste of Erling's potential, and Dortmund fans knew that they had signed the next big thing, but the boy's brilliance had truly yet to reach the mainstream media. That was until Haaland's second most viral moment of his career. February 18th, 2020, Dortmund vs PSG in the Champions League round of 16. The Prince of Paris and world football's newly appointed wonder boy decorated PSG's already elite lineup. Kylian Mbappe, widely regarded as the best young player on the planet, would lead the line for the Parisians. The superstar was 2 years removed from his World Cup victory with France in 2018, where he was the team's top scorer at the age of just 19. Talks of Ballon d'Ors and Golden Boots were already brewing, with comparisons to Thierry Henry and Cristiano Ronaldo not far behind. Now, Messi and Ronaldo's heir apparent could have been on that field, but he just might have been playing for the other team. Haaland opened scoring in the 66th minute, poaching Guerrero's deflected shot into the net. It was truly a showcase for the future of football as Mbappe split 2 defenders to assist Neymar, tying the game 1-1, just for Haaland to score the game winner just 1 minute later. Now, PSG would win the return leg in March, but not without first adding fire to the Erling media inferno. The team celebrated mocking Haaland, copying his signature meditation celebration after the victory. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but to think that a 19-year-old kid could get under the skin of an entire team of professional athletes. It wasn't a whisper anymore. Haaland had truly announced himself to the world stage, and after a brief interruption because of COVID, continued his form in the Bundesliga. On June 20th, he concluded his season with a brace against RB Leipzig, clinching second place for Dortmund, securing Champions League football next season. Haaland finished his first half season with Dortmund with 16 goals in 18 appearances in all competitions. And when you add the first half of the season he played for Salzburg, Haaland amassed 44 total goals and 40 appearances in all competitions for both clubs, averaging 1.1 goals a game for the calendar year. And his first full season in the Bundesliga would prove to be equally as impressive. He scored in the season opener against Borussia Mönchengladbach and against Bayern Munich in his first Klassiker appearance. Fast forward to an outrageous November, where he scored 4 goals in just 32 minutes against Hertha, helping him win his second Player of the Month honor in the Bundesliga. And he was just as hot in the Champions League. He scored 4 times in Dortmund's first 4 games of the group stage, making him the fastest player to record 15 Champions League goals, doing so in just 12 games. His hot streak came to an end in December, however, as he would spend the final month of 2020 recovering from a hamstring injury. He would miss a total of 7 games during the busy holiday season. But Haaland was back in action by January 2021, scoring a brace against Leipzig and another goal against Mönchengladbach. Then came February, where we saw Haaland score a brace against Sevilla in the first leg of the Champions League round of 16. March would see Dortmund lose to Bayern Munich yet again, despite Haaland netting 2 goals against them. Haaland wouldn't finish the game though, coming off with an injury, something to keep in mind for later. He recovered in time to face Sevilla for the return leg, scoring twice again, pushing Dortmund to the Champions League quarterfinal. Haaland would re-injure himself at the end of April, however, missing another 2 games due to continued muscular problems. He returned quickly though in the middle of May in amazing fashion, scoring a brace against Leipzig in the DFB Pokal final, his performance sealing the club's first Pokal trophy since 2016. Haaland ended his first full season in Dortmund with 27 goals in the league, 10 goals in the Champions League, and 3 in the DFB Pokal for a total of 40 goals and 40 appearances, averaging exactly a goal a game. Fans voted him the Bundesliga Player of the Year, and they would see him return for his 3rd campaign with Dortmund that August. And he started the season as dominant as ever, scoring a hat-trick in the first game of the Pokal, and a brace against Frankfurt in the first game of the Bundesliga. By the end of matchday 5, Haaland had found the net 7 times and registered 4 assists, averaging 2.2 goals and assists per game. But this is the part of the story where the main character has his setbacks. Erling injured his hamstring again, sidelining him from the end of September to the middle of October, missing 3 competitive games in the process. He returned on October 16th in superhuman fashion and scored a brace against Mainz, but found himself on the injury table just 5 days later with a hip flexor issue. Haaland missed a month of football and 7 games in all competitions as a result. And the injury history so far didn't look pretty. He was back by the end of November and would start 8 consecutive games for Dortmund, scoring 7 and assisting twice, returning to what seemed like his absolute best. But the injuries just kept coming. January 2022 saw Haaland suffer another muscle injury, adding to his growing list of bumps and bruises, forcing him to miss a month and a half of football and 6 games during that time span. And it's at this point in the story where you start to worry. The beautiful game has seen its most graceful players spend the prime of their career suffering from injuries. Some are forced to retire, some peak early and never reach those heights again, and some are abandoned in the library of football's greatest what-if stories. Losing Haaland in the same way we've lost so many athletes during their prime would be a casualty football would hardly be able to comprehend. But luckily for everyone, Erling had a great bounce back to the season. Haaland finished his 3rd campaign at Dortmund with 22 goals in the Bundesliga, 4 goals in the Pokal, and 3 goals in the Champions League, for a total of 29 goals and 29 appearances in all competitions, still averaging a goal a game despite his injuries. In his 2 seasons with Salzburg and 3 campaigns with Dortmund, the Norwegian teenager matured into a generational goal scorer at a pace that the sport has literally never seen before. He scored 29 goals in 27 appearances for the Austrian champions, and 85 goals in 87 appearances for the Black and Yellow. That's 114 goals in 114 games, averaging exactly a goal a game for his entire career so far. And this is the part of the story that I'm calling the second beginning. And just when we thought things couldn't get any crazier, enter Pep Guardiola and Manchester City. Off the back of 4 Premier League titles in 5 seasons, Guardiola's side are widely accepted as having the most attractive, effective, and entertaining style of play in world football. So naturally, they go ahead and sign the best available striker on the market. The Haaland family legacy continued as City announced the signing of Alfie's son on June 13, 2022 after activating his $58 million release clause. And can you believe that there were people with access to internet that would have the audacity to suggest that he would flop?
Erling Haaland will not live up to the expectation.
At the beginning of the 2022 season, people were seriously pitting Haaland and Darwin Núñez against each other. And after Haaland missed a sitter in the Community Shield, people were already writing him off. Bundesliga fraud, overrated and overhyped. Núñez is clear, the headlines were everywhere. It took 1 game for the media to make their minds up, and it would take 1 game for them to change it again. In his Premier League debut, Haaland scored the only 2 goals in City's 2-0 win against West Ham United. He scored again in the 3-3 thriller versus Newcastle 2 games later, making it 3 goals in 3 games. And that was just his warm-up. Week 4 was when he really took it to another level. Haaland scored his first hat-trick for City against a tenacious Crystal Palace. His increasingly impressive ability in the air, as well as his unbelievable positional awareness, were all on display. But the 3rd goal is where we would see a combination of power and speed that's genuinely frightening. After that game, there was no turning back. He scored another hat-trick in the very next game against Nottingham Forest in just 38 minutes. Haaland scored in his 3rd consecutive game in City's 1-1 tie with Aston Villa, before returning to the competition that put him on the map, the Champions League. On September 6, 2022, Haaland scored twice against Sevilla in the Champions League group stage, just like he did on September 3, 2021 when he was still playing with Dortmund. And speaking of Dortmund, Haaland would play against his former teammates in the 2nd group stage game of the competition just 8 days later. Dortmund's new wonder boy Jude Bellingham scored early in the 2nd half, putting Haaland's former club up 1-0 heading into the 80th minute. John Stones, of all people, leveled the contest with an absolute screamer a minute later. And just when you thought you'd seen the very best of what football had to offer, Cancelo and Erling combined for this. The outside boot service from the Portuguese, matched by the pure athleticism from a Norwegian lab experiment gone right, Haaland won the game with perhaps the most impressive goal of his career yet. But there was no time to rest. Just 3 days later and it was back to Premier League action, where Haaland scored again, this time against Wolves in City's 3-0 win, as we entered October. And this is where we started the video, with Haaland's hat-trick in the most one-sided Manchester derby in recent memory. For anyone keeping track so far, the numbers are simply astounding. Haaland has 17 goals and 3 assists in 11 games in the Premier League, and 5 goals in 4 games in the Champions League. That's 22 goals in 15 games in all competitions, averaging a goal every 58 minutes. And the closer you look into it, the more impressive it gets. Amongst forwards in the top 5 European leagues, Haaland ranks in the 99th percentile for expected goals and goals per shot. He also ranks in the 98th percentile for shots on target, 95th for total shots, and 93rd for touches in the opposition box. And just as the footballing world closes the door on 2 of its greatest players of all time, it opens its imagination to an exciting future. A future of potential, a future of promise, a future that'll focus on the faces of the few that inhibit our idea of impossible. The story of Haaland is a story suspended in air, trapped in the breath taken from us with every goal he scores, resuming itself only as often as Erling allows it. And in the time between, the blemish of memory will marry itself to clearer numbers that show us what we've already seen, a story of success, a story of succession, a story of a footballer's son, or perhaps the most accurate way I can phrase it, Erling Braut Haaland, the story so far.